If you're curious, it's going to look like this when he's done. Maybe. I never really know what it's going to look like. He threatened to put some other drawings up there of Groucho Marx, but I won't know because I can't see it until it's over. All I can see is all of you, which is fun. It's fun to be part of a church. It's fun to be part of a community and to look out and see faces that I love and I just am excited to see. I couldn't help but while we were singing to sit up here to be able to look out and to see Tom and to see Emil, to be able to see Jeff and to be able to see Mike and to see Joey and to see Abe and so many other people fills my heart with joy. It's fun to be a part of a community of believers, to be a part of this church. But increasingly in the midst of all that, I find that there is this narrative that I'm hearing time and time again. I hear it all over the place, that we are living into a time of exiled, the church is in a time of exile, moving into a time of exile. We might not completely be there. Most of us recognize that we aren't in jail for our faith right now, so we know it can get worse. And many of us are quite aware of the fact that we're not dead for our faith now, so we know it could get worse. But all of us would have to recognize that the church has lost some of its prominent position in the culture. We've been pushed into the margins. There are millions of examples of this. One of the ones that really sticks out for me that I remember saying, oh, something has shifted, came about 15 years ago. I say about because I don't remember exactly when it happened. It must have been a while ago because I haven't watched the Today Show in quite a long time. I haven't been able to get up in the morning and watch the Today Show before I take the kids to school in quite a long time. So we'll say about 15 years. Kirk Cameron was being interviewed. You remember Kirk Cameron from Growing Pains and then from a career as being a Christian and making movies and doing things and really always having the spotlight on him. This was one of those early spotlight moments where he was being interviewed about a film project by Ann Curry on the Today Show, and things seemed to be going swimmingly well, when suddenly it took a turn. You see, he'd been interviewed a couple days earlier by someone and asked his opinions on gay marriage, and he had given a very direct answer to that question. And Ann Curry decides it's time to bring that up. And so she goes down that path and she says, do you really think it's okay in the 2000s for someone to have those beliefs? And Kirk Cameron fumbled his way through the interview, and I don't really remember much of what happened after that. What I remember was being stunned in the moment that the question could be asked by Ann Curry at all. Something had shifted. Would it be okay to have those beliefs? And in a world that has only progressed in those 15 years in a different direction, we increasingly see examples of this. In a world where praying on the 50-yard line might turn into a Supreme Court case, who knows what's going to happen if you espouse out in the world your Christian beliefs? We have to admit to ourselves that we're no longer in the center and in the thick of things. And we're increasingly finding ourselves in the margin. And it can be really tempting for the people of God in their everyday lives as the church to look at that and bemoan it and decide to look back to when it was good. Oh, you remember in years, decades ago, when the church was really the center of things, when a politician would have to at least pander to us, would have to at least pretend to espouse our values, because those were the mainstream values, that Judeo-Christian ideal. Oh, to have that. To be able to know that our teachers were teaching our kids with the same value structure that we had, not actively opposing that value structure and trying to undo it, but pouring into it regardless of where they were. To know that when you turned on the TV, the value structure of the main characters and of the protagonists would be leading towards your value structure. And on occasion, they would go to church or say a prayer around the dinner table or something like that. Oh, if only we could get back to the way things used to be when the church was kind of in the center of everything instead of pushed off to the margins. This exile-like narrative is not a new one. It's quite an old one. We can find it throughout history at different times of God's people in their everyday lives as the church. It is indeed actually the narrative that's taking place nearly 2,000 years ago in Asia Minor, as a bunch of Christians are living in Asia Minor and not really wanting to be there, but having been displaced by Rome, been put there. They're living out that narrative in a much worse way than any of us are. No, they're actually exiled. And they're facing an oppression and a persecution that's much worse than anything we're facing. They actually are finding their lives in danger. They actually are finding their livelihood in danger. They actually are being oppressed. They actually are being persecuted to an extreme degree where their livelihood and their lives can be in danger because they have chosen to follow Jesus. And so it must have been very tempting for these first century Christians in Asia Minor to look back and think to the glory days. And you think, well, Christianity is pretty new. Were there glory days? Sure there were. Think back. It wasn't that many years before when Jesus was on the scene. Well, it wasn't easy for Jesus. Well, no, but thousands of people followed him. There was a time not that long before when crowds of so many people that he had to escape and disappear under the sea. He was a popular dude. He was so popular that the Pharisees and the Sadducees, when they decided they wanted to put him to death, were afraid to do so. Because when you feed 5,000 men with fishes and loaves, not to mention the women and children, that's a rather large crowd, and you don't want to make that crowd mad. So there was a time where, yes, maybe the authority and the leadership structure didn't like Jesus, but there was a time for those first century Christians to think back to and think, oh, if only we could get back to there, where all the people were on our side and Christianity had a more prominent place and we were all just following Jesus. And so you can only imagine the excitement these first century Christians may have had when they got a letter from a dude who had been there at the time. He'd actually been there. He'd been one of that crowd, not just one of the thousands of crowd. Oh no, he'd been one of the select 12. And he had come along with Jesus. He followed all the way to the cross. Okay, at the end, there was a little bit with denying and some stuff like that, but he got reinstated by a resurrected Jesus. This guy was there. And he's not just that, he's so cool that the Holy Spirit used him on Pentecost to give the first Christian sermon post-resurrection. He stands in Jerusalem in front of the crowd, and masses of people come to faith. This is the guy who can tell us how to get back to where we're supposed to be, at the center of things. And so when they get this letter from the Apostle Peter, they are excited to open that scroll up and start reading it. And sure enough, Peter delivers right from the beginning. He acknowledges their suffering. He acknowledges that it is suffering, that they are oppressed. He even equates them to people of God from hundreds of years before and their suffering and their dispersion and their exile. He even equates Rome with Babylon, the ones who had made those people suffer. Because you see, this story of exile, it really is a very, very old story. And so if you hearken back for a moment to hundreds of years ago, or maybe to my Bible class back there, you'll remember the Babylonian captivity. And at that time in the captivity, if you remember, they were carted off from Jerusalem to Babylon. And they had it even worse than the first century Christians. Those guys had it really bad. Their houses destroyed. Their homes gone, their temple razed to the ground. And they are now living in captivity, being told they cannot worship their God. and they are under the heel, the boot of oppression. And you can just imagine how they were thinking, oh, I long for the days back when King David was king and the temple was built and other kingdoms feared us. We didn't fear them taking us. No, they feared we were going to get them. We were the powerhouse. How do we get back to being like that in the center of things? And so you can only imagine their excitement when they get a letter from God. Oh, sure, it comes through the hands of Jeremiah, but Jeremiah makes no bones about it. Yahweh told me to say exactly this, so I'm saying exactly this. Don't shoot the messenger. And why is Jeremiah being so careful to say that? Well, because it turns out that God has maybe a little something different to say to those people. They're living an exile narrative, and he wants to flip the story. That's not the story that God had for his people. The story God had for his people is that they weren't exiles, they were ambassadors of a coming kingdom, of his kingdom. That is who they were. Now, when you think about it, ambassadors and exiles have some things in common, don't they? Right? I mean, they're both living in a foreign land. They're both surrounded by another culture that is foreign to them, that does things different than them, that has different values than them, and probably doesn't like their values, their culture, and their stuff. However, exiles are forced to go there, and ambassadors are sent. And they are sent by their king to be a representative of the home kingdom. Sent to let people know what that kingdom is actually like. So in this letter that Yahweh sends through Jeremiah to the Israelites, he says, I got news for you. You're going to be here a while. You're right. Something better is coming. But it's not back there. It's up here. And the first round of it's not going to look like you thought. No. Because when I send the king, he'll be a suffering servant. And he will suffer for all. But when he comes back, that's when the party will really get started. That'll be my day, the day of the Lord. And on that day, every knee will bow. But you start bowing now. Because I'm going to leave you here in the meantime to live amongst these people as my ambassadors, to show them what my coming kingdom looks like, to react differently than they do. You will be a sort of foretaste. So in the meantime, seek the welfare of the city in which I placed you. I put you there, so make it a better place. I've given you gifts. Some of you are very good bakers, so bake really good bread and do it with compassion and love. Some of you are very good builders, so build houses, not just for you, but for your neighbors, and do it with compassion and love. Some of you are very good leaders and politicians, so lead. But don't lead my kingdom. I lead my kingdom. You serve, you lead through service there. And they did. They did. And for 70 years, the world was changed by their actions. And some of the names from that time period sound like a gong and reverberate through history as we hear names like Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, and Daniel. These people dressed funny and got made fun of for it. Ate funny and got made fun of for it. Didn't worship the gods around them and got made fun of for it. But served so faithfully and were loved so much by the people and even the king that others got jealous because people said, I want to know a little bit more about that kingdom that these guys come from. These guys are ambassadors of something different, and I want to know more about it. And some of them just maybe, wanted to join it. And so it is this story that Peter is referencing when he talks to those first century Christians and says, I know you're in exile, but remember them. And he reaches out and he says, I know you're suffering under the boot of Rome, but you are ambassadors of another kingdom, and you have it even better than those guys did, because you have actually seen that suffering servant come and go. And he is Jesus the Christ. He is our King, and his blood has made you clean. And just like Noah and his family were brought through the waters of death and destruction to safety, you too in baptism have been brought through the waters and united to that kingdom. Your citizenship of the coming kingdom is now secure. You have no doubts about it. You have been made new, and your hope is certain. And the king has now sent you as ambassadors to this place, not exiles, to represent the coming kingdom, so that your everyday lives as God's people, as the church, might look different than the world around you. It should look different than the world around you. So, Peter says to them, when you get oppressed, and you will, when you are suffering, and you will, ask yourself, what would my king do? What did my king do? And turn the other cheek. When they're putting you down and insulting you, ask, what did my king do? And as a representative of a coming kingdom in your everyday lives as the church, get down on your knees and serve. Maybe even wash some feet. Oh, speak the truth, but do it gently and in love. Because you will find as you do this, some people are just going to get madder at you and want to push you further into the margins. But others are going to see something different, and it's going to make them curious, and they're going to want to understand. And so they're going to draw a little closer to this odd representative of another kingdom so that they might learn a little bit more about that kingdom. And they'll ask you, why do you believe the things you believe? And you should be ready and have a response at hand. And tell them winsomely, welcomingly about that kingdom. And some of them maybe, just maybe, will decide they want to become members of that kingdom instead. And these first century Christians in Asia Minor, that's what they did. We have historical records to prove it. And it changed the world. It wasn't just them, it was pockets of ambassadors sent all around the globe. And they kept getting sent place after place. And everywhere they went, their everyday lives as the church looked different because they understood they were ambassadors of a coming kingdom. And they represented their king. And the world was transformed by it. And often, the world was changed faster and bigger, and more people joined the kingdom when it was in the margins. Because people somehow found that it was easier to look different when they were in the margins. It was maybe the better place for them to be, to remember who they are as an ambassador. And so in today's world, when we see the Kirk Cameron interviews, when people bemoan about 50-yard line prayers, or what's on TV, or what a politician is saying, and say how we are being pushed to the margins, I sometimes wonder about our everyday lives as the church. Might it be that we need to remember that we are ambassadors of a coming kingdom, and that our response should be like our king's? That we should indeed look different, and not be looking back to the days when we had control and power, but be looking forward to when the king returns and when every knee will be forced to bow, and recognize that our knee gets to bow now. And as it does, and our everyday lives are filled with compassion and love and gentleness, when we respond to hate with love, some people will just get mad, but others will want to draw a little closer. Others will want to know just a little bit more about that kingdom, and they will have questions for us, and they will ask about that kingdom, and we will have answers as ambassadors for the reasons for our faith. And we will say them gently and in love. And then maybe, just maybe, some of those people will actually want to join the kingdom. And we will welcome them with open arms as we gather waiting for our King and rejoice in song. Amen. With that in mind, let us join in song